so much change in the landscape, especially as it relates to artificial intelligence and the way that we're incorporating this into all aspects of things that we do, whether, in our personal lives, professional lives. And I think that if nothing else, that is something that future employers are going to be looking to. A lot of our MBA programs are offering courses in this area, helping students become really well versed in their ability to positively impact organizations in this area going forward. And I think it'll be something that will provide a little bit of an edge to students who have the MBA and have these skill sets versus some others who don't. So if nothing else, I think that's a really important reason to kind of consider, the landscape, the changing ways that we do our work and your ability to make an impact in that.
Really good points. Thank you so much. Claire, thank you for getting the chat enabled. I'm seeing people post their locations. We have people from all over the country and all over the world: Zimbabwe, Lima, Bangladesh, Nigeria, Russia, India, Kazakhstan, and more. I know it's really late in some of those locations, so we appreciate you staying up late to join us, but it's so exciting to see. Oh, Tokyo just popped in too. So thank you all so much for joining us from all over the world. Okay, I think we're going to transition now to the various components of the admissions process. And we're going to start with academic aptitude, two parts of academic aptitude. Lisa from Cornell is going to start with academics, more from the perspective of your undergraduate performance, and then Matt from Ross will pick it up with talking about standardized tests. So Lisa, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Donna. Your academic profile will be something that every MBA program you apply to will be looking towards and assessing. What we'll be looking for in this area and in our applications will be for you to upload academic coursework from your undergraduate institution. If you took any sort of transfer credits, we often are going to be looking to those classes as well. If you earned an advanced degree, you'll also be required in most cases to provide those transcripts as well. It really allows us to see the full picture of your previous academic journey. It is one indicator of potential success in graduate level work, so it is certainly something that is an important component of your application. We'll look at your GPA, but I think what's also important to note is that we're also kind of looking at the classes that you took, your journey over time, how maybe you grew into some of your coursework or really improved your GPA over time. I think this piece can be scary for candidates sometimes, especially if you're someone who maybe didn't perform as strong during your undergraduate studies. It's usually an area many of us are well versed in hearing from candidates about a little bit of panic over that GPA. It's something you can't change. So unfortunately, your GPA is your GPA. We all have holistic admissions processes so that we're able to pull out other strong points from your application to help kind of determine an admission decision. So the GPA is not the only piece that we'll be looking at. I think what is also worth knowing is that many of us are also well versed in international transcripts from all over the world. So we're also somewhat familiar with different grading scales in other countries. Some of us may require a West type evaluation, and many of us don't. So you might just want to check with the programs that you're applying to if you have an international transcript regarding those particular processes for each individual school. But certainly transcripts in English if you're applying from a country outside of the US, and your transcript may not automatically be in English, so something to keep in mind. Outside of that, my colleague Matt will speak to a little bit about the test scores. If you're someone who is worried about your undergraduate GPA, as I mentioned, we are looking to pull different quantitative aspects from other areas of your application. One of the ways you can kind of counterbalance that GPA is certainly with a test score. And I will let my colleague Matt speak a little bit further to that.
Thanks so much, Lisa. And yes, just to reiterate, it's a holistic process, right? We evaluate the entire, we care about who you are, not just what a single test score is on your behalf, but it's really important to evaluate, which tests you want to take if you want to take one at all. So a lot of schools, you'll hear about the GMAT and the GRE, but there's a lot of dual degree students or maybe someone who's already earned their JD or MCAT. But for the purpose of this call, we'll really just focus on the GMAT and the GRE. They're both around 2-hour tests, cost about the same amount of money. There's one big difference that the GMAT has a data insights component, whereas the GRE has a writing component. So the GMAT has changed and no longer has that writing component. They're on different scales, but we've all been doing this work for a long time, so we know how to compare scores from a GRE to a GMAT. There's a percentile attached to each score. If you are deciding to take a test, and most do, but some don't, depends on the school whether they permit a letter stating that they've demonstrated certain aptitude, especially in the more quant finance background, whether they do or do not need to take a test, but most still do. And take the test that you feel like you're going to perform best at, and the test that you feel like is going to reflect your aptitude and ability to be successful in business school. Once again, they're similar, but not exactly the same. So we encourage you to take practice tests, take multiple practice tests for both the GRE and the GMAT, get the feedback, see where your strengths are, where your weaknesses may be, and continue to practice and take the test that makes the most sense for you. For the most part, most schools are somewhat indifferent between the GMAT and the GRE. But once again, it's really important for you to understand where you can shine best. And back to what Lisa said earlier, if you have a liberal arts background, or let's say your GPA is lower than the average student for the class profile, the standardized test is somewhat a level playing field for all of us. It's the most objective metric that we can compare candidates. A student who studied engineering at school X is a very different experience than someone who studied social sciences in a foreign country, right? Whereas the standardized test, everyone takes that same test, and so we can compare candidates. But once again, it could be a differentiator, but no one score or one objective metric is going to make or break your candidacy. So we encourage you to explore different test options, practice multiple, practice each of them, and then submit and take the test that you feel like is going to make you shine the best. Lisa, I don't know if you have any other additions to the GMAT GRE conversation.
Okay, I've been watching the chat. Oh, I'm sorry. Were you going to speak, Lisa? Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Dawn.
Okay, great. Well, I've been watching the chat to see what questions are coming in related to this topic. So I'm going to follow up with some of them. One question is, do we collectively consider if a candidate has a CFA or CPA? We consider that at Darden.
Yes. I think
across.
Most programs probably do. And there's certainly a positive quantitative component to an application.
Yeah, that absolutely. Okay, great. I was assuming that would be the case, but just thought I'd ask. Another question that came in the chat is, how many of us accept the EA, the executive assessment? I guess we could just show a raise of hands. Okay, all right. And then finally, could a few people talk about, let's do a show of hands, how many of us have some type of test waiver process? Let's do a show of hands. Okay, great. All right, so maybe a question, because I do know, having close colleagues from different schools, that the way our test waiver processes probably vary slightly. So maybe we could go into more detail in the school-specific breakout rooms. But yeah, it looks like several of us do have a test waiver process. Did any of the other panelists want to comment on anything else related to academics or standardized testing? Lisa and Matt did such a great job covering so many topics. Anybody else? Okay, then we are going to extracurricular activities and your resume.
Awesome. Thank you. So I think you've heard a few of us mention already that it's a very holistic review process and that we are really looking to get to know you as an applicant. And I think a big part of that is knowing who you are outside of work. So what are the things that you are involved in or you're passionate about? And a lot of those can come through these extracurricular activities. Every school is going to be a little different on exactly how they're asking you to present these. At Fuqua, we have an entire leadership and involvement section where we really do just want to get to know how you've impacted the communities you've been a part of. And I think for all of the schools, really showcasing that impact, and whether that be extracurriculars during undergrad or things you're doing currently outside of work, even if you've taken on something like a care committee in your current role at work, that it's not technically a part of your job, that can be really great to know, just to see how you've impacted your community. I think with a lot of things in the application process, we're going to be looking for like quality over quantity. So kind of showcasing the ways that you've had big impact, the things you've really been a part of. Don't feel like you need to have a million things here. I think 1 or 2 things that you've been involved in for a long time and have really like grown and been dedicated to is going to be well favored from an admissions perspective, more so than if you have been involved in 50 things, but only for one day. And I think each school is going to be a little different too in what their resume requirements are. Most schools, if you're under 10 years of work experience, are going to ask you to keep that resume to 1 page. So kind of finding that balance. If there's not a section to include leadership and involvement on what things you include there, a lot of schools, you'll be able to include it in both. So don't leave it out with those extracurricular things. But when thinking about your resume and how you're framing your work experience, it'll be a little different than a resume that you use to get the current position you're in. So really focusing on ways that you've managed people or projects or budgets, again, looking at that impact and quality and making sure you're really highlighting your career progression in your resume is also really great and something that we are all looking for.
Great. Thank you so much, Victoria. I think you raised such a good point early on too about emphasizing impact. I mean, so many schools are looking for potentially high impact leaders, and really focusing on impact, I think was a particularly important point. And it can be impact on an individual, it could be on a team, it could be, within your industry, it could be in a group. But I just wanted to amplify that point. Anybody? Okay, there's a question that came through. Are there any templates for a resume that we can refer to? This is online. I have for business school resumes. I would imagine there would be a lot of resources.
Yeah, I agree. There's not one template that sticks out in my mind, but there are plenty of resources. Again, looking at your specific schools you're applying to, requirements, and trying to keep it to that 1 page.
Yeah, good advice. Okay, any other panelists want to add these and the resume? I'm so glad somebody asked about the template, because as Matt said earlier, there's no one element of your application that is going to make or break you. However, it is pretty common to see a format that isn't, particularly professional looking. And it's just one of those things you can do to take your application to the next level. You're going to need to do it anyway when you're a business school student. So, and I also think it can be a real confidence booster to work on your resume and reflect on what you do want to emphasize as you're putting it into a more professional format. But
if people are looking for a resource there. That one.
Okay, great so much, Amber. Will probably be very helpful to participants. Okay, so we're going to go on to the topic of essays, and Neji from NYU Stern is going to tackle that topic.
Yes, thank you so much, Donna. So I think essays are one of the parts of the application which I think we would all agree are the most fun reading. For you, the opportunity to fully present yourself to the admissions committee, and in turn allows us to learn a little bit more about who you are. Right answer. There are many different things that we're looking for, but we just ultimately want to get more insight into your story and who you are and how you would be a good culture fit into our community. So just sharing some really quick tips about crafting your essay. Number one is definitely plan ahead. Allow for a lot of time to craft your essays because you are going to have to edit them down, especially thinking about keeping it brief to the number of words that you get from each school. So the more time that you give yourself to really craft your essays, the more intentional you can be with your responses and your overall narrative. Again, you're going to have to edit and spell check in order to make sure it's the best essay that you're providing. And again, the other thing going back to that is related to the number of words, keeping it brief. Most of the answers are going to be 200 words or less. And so it's typically going to take you a couple of drafts to really have the response that's authentic and compelling and falls within that word limit. Another tip that I often share is find a good editor. I always recommend having someone that knows you best, like a friend or a colleague, that can really take a look at your essays to make sure that it really speaks true to who you are and that you're answering the questions directly. A fresh set of eyes can make a big difference. We say that a lot at Stern and can be really helpful in crafting your essay. And then the last piece of advice that I have is don't cut and paste. We put a lot of time into what questions that we choose to ask. So repurposing essays can be quite noticeable to the admissions committee. I think we all may have had an experience reading essays that we know may not have been created specifically with the intention of responding to our essay question and may have been taken from another school's essay. So best piece of advice is to make sure that you're answering each question directly and specifically for each school. So in closing, for me personally, just remember that your essay is a unique opportunity to share your story with us. By being authentic and thoughtful and intentional in your essays, you really give us the best chance to understand who you are and what drives you. So again, take your time, be genuine, and let your true self shine through.
Great advice. It's so interesting as I listen to the panelists how universal so many of these tips and pearls of wisdom are across schools. I'm shaking my head by how many things that Neji mentioned are relevant to our process as well. Great. Any other panelists want to comment on essays before we move on to the next topic? And I am watching the chat, and at the end, I am going to incorporate some Q&A so that this can be more interactive. I see lots of questions coming in, and I'll incorporate them at the end, as many as we possibly can. But any other advice regarding essays before we move on? Nope. Okay. All right, well, we're going to move on to another topic, and that is letters of recommendation. And Maria from Berkeley Haas is going to take that one on.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, so letters of recommendation, I think most or all programs here will accept one or two letters. Anyone accept one? Okay, there's a few. And then I think the rest will require two letters of recommendation. I think I'll start off with some advice. The first piece of advice that I would give you all is to meet with your recommenders or your potential recommenders and ask in advance. Definitely don't, I'd say 6 months before you apply, try to avoid that. Because you want to give yourself time to have a coffee chat with your recommender, share your goals, your YMBA, the programs that you're considering. You also may want to have some conversations around, your strengths, maybe your areas of growth. You want this, to be an honest, open conversation, and you want to meet with them regularly and really discuss like your goals and your intentions with them. Who should be writing these letters of recommendations? Ideally, these should come from current or former supervisors. We want to see detailed comments, examples of, your working style, your leadership skills, initiative, career success, impact, contributions, etc. So again, you want to choose individuals that can speak to these all these different parts of your professional journey. I know that some people will want to the recommender to be like high level, high ranking individuals, CEO, CFO. But you want to, if you have not had many interactions with these individuals, maybe you've only met them in an elevator, 5-minute conversation, they may not be the best person. This is one place in the application where you have control. So be intentional with that, right? So make sure that, those individuals can provide those details, those examples of the impact you're having, your leadership potential. And we're not so much looking at the title of the individual, we're looking at the content of the letter. We're also not assessing the recommender's writing style or English language ability, especially for those of you who are working with global partners. But you do want to choose individual that can share those details and examples of the impact growth that you're having. Now, we also understand that there are special circumstances where, you are new to your role. Your supervisor's new to their role, or you're an entrepreneur, so you may submit letters of recommendation from former supervisors, a client, a colleague who has supervised your work. But again, make sure that this individual, you're meeting with them regularly and that they can provide those detailed comments, examples of your contribution and the impact you're having. And I would also say use the application. I think most of our applications will have a space where you can share, why you're choosing this recommender. So do share that information. Don't leave us wondering or guessing like, oh, I wonder why they didn't select, their current supervisor. It's perfectly okay to say, I'm applying in confidence, or my supervisor is new to this role, or whatever the situation is, definitely share that in your application so we understand your decision behind selecting the recommenders you're selecting. All right, thank you.
Thank you so much, Maria. Any other additional insights on letters of recommendation? Okay, then we will move on to the final topic before we get a little bit more into Q&A, and that is the topic of interviews. And Amber from Yale is going to address interviews.
Great. So the interview is a really great chance to connect with a member of our community. So this is a chance where you're going to have generally a one-on-one conversation, or sometimes it may be a panel. For all of the schools here, generally it's an invitation only process after you've submitted your application. I know that for early action for Darden, there is a process where you may be able to sign up for open spots for interviews, but generally it's invite only. It generally is also a requirement for admission to a program. And I know this part could be very stressful as you're waiting for that invitation. And something that I'll just mention is it's generally on a rolling basis. It's also not based on like the value of your relative value of your application, but generally it takes us all a long time to go through those applications. So I don't want you to be discouraged if right away you're not getting an invitation. So I think that in terms of preparing for an interview, what I would suggest is go back over and read through your application, what you've already submitted to us, have that thought deeply about why you want to have an MBA at this point in time. I mean, one of the things that is very, which is exceptional about MBA is that you can do it at different points in your life. So why is now the right time for you? What are you hoping to get out of the experience? And know about the school that you're interviewing with. Obviously, like think about like, how do I want to use the resources that are available to me at that school? You know, what clubs do I want to be part of? What classes am I interested in taking? And just have thought about those things. And then, you know, generally we try to make these as a friendly and inviting experience. We're not there to stress you out. We want you to connect with the person that's interviewing you. Again, that may vary. It may be an admissions officer. It may be a member of the alumni. It may be a current student. So whoever it is going to have a pretty deep connection with that school. So also think about types of questions that you might ask of those 3 categories of people, depending on like about their experience of the school or what they think are, you know, the benefits, because you're also learning more about the school through this process. I will say that you may also have the option of an in-person interview or a Zoom interview. And we know that not everyone can travel, and certainly today we have people from all over the world, so we don't expect that everyone can travel, and that is not a disadvantage. I want to say that up front, that it's not a disadvantage if you're not able to attend in person. But if you do have the capacity to visit the campus and have an in-person interview, I think that's a wonderful way to connect. We usually will set up some other activities around the interview day as well to make it an opportunity for you to really get to know the community in a deeper level.
Great. Thank you so much, Amber. Any other insights on interviews? I think you raised such a good point at the end about asking questions, and the nature of the questions you ask can really show how much research a candidate has done on the school. I think many schools really want students who really want to be at their specific schools and really appreciate in an interview that somebody has done a lot of research and is asking more probing, penetrating, thoughtful questions, as opposed to questions you can easily get answered on that website. So, you know, good point about the importance of asking good questions too.
I think
Yeah,
one.
go ahead. I was going to say one more thing I would add about the interviews is come in with specific examples. The more specific you can set the context, it helps tell your story a little bit better. We'll all have different types of questions, oftentimes behavioral-based questions, like tell me a time when. And the better you can get of succinctly answering that question with specific examples and the impact that you drove, it's just a better interview for both the interviewer and the interviewee.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point too. The power of anecdotes and vignettes and stories. I can think of people who did that, and years later, I remember those stories. And I think some research shows when you tell a story, it tends to be, the human brain tends to remember them as well. I think that's an excellent point.
Yeah, and I was going to just add, make sure you practice. Don't come into the interview like reading off a script. Yeah, I think, Matt, great tip. Like, come in with specific examples. I think one common theme you'll hear in this process is make time to reflect on your experience, both personal, professional. Come in prepared to tell your story, but definitely practice. Don't come into the interview reading off a computer screen. We can often tell, right? There's not a lot of expression, and there's an awkward stare into the screen. So make sure that you are practicing and coming in prepared, drawing from different examples and being ready to share your story.
Good point. Okay, I think what we'll do now is use the next maybe 10 to 15 minutes to try to address some of the questions that are coming in the Q&A. If you have a question that you haven't submitted yet, please do it in the Q&A, not the chat that I mentioned earlier. And I am monitoring them and gonna, so some of the questions are, is work experience mandatory? What is the average years of work experience? How do we look at work experience in the application? I'm going to just open that up for your insight on work experience and how that's evaluated. There are just a lot of questions about it in the Q&A.
I can chime in on this one first. I know every school is going to be a little different. For us, work experience is not required, but it is one of the major components of the application. Kind of as I was mentioning earlier, looking for quality over quantity. The average number of work experience years for Duke is 5, around 5, but we do have people that fall under that range and over that range. I think, again, focusing on quality. So we'd rather see somebody who has 2.5 years of work experience, but has had strong impact in their role, as opposed to somebody who's been working in the same role for 6 years and hasn't been able to showcase that impact as much. So making sure you're highlighting that, the ways that you've managed people, projects, and budgets. You can think about these things when having the conversation with your recommender on examples for them to include. Also think about this when going into your interview. So it's not just about what's in the work experience section, but also how you're presenting that work in other areas of your application. I think one of the reasons work experience is important is because we want you to bring that experience and the things that you've been a part of and the challenges you faced into the classroom experience, and to be able to contribute in that way to talk through problem solving. So that's a great way to kind of think about it. Again, there's no like hard requirement. But we are, looking for candidates who have some experience, just because you'll get more of out of the classroom experience, and so will your other cohort.
Thanks so much, Victoria. Any other insights on work experience?
I'll add something. And all of us have different programs for early action or deferral, but we have a specific program for people coming directly from undergrad. So they would do the first year of the MBA with us, and then they'd have an extended internship and then come back for the second year of the MBA. So there are options and they vary by program. I also want to put in a word for folks that have, more work experience than maybe the average to not be intimidated by that. As someone who applied with 10 years of work experience myself, I definitely want to advocate for those folks too. I will say that, we always talk about holistic evaluation of applications. So the more work experience and probably the higher quality of that work experience can also balance. Sometimes we have that distance from that academic experience that we had. So we can be a little bit more forgiving with the stellar work experience and the high quality work experience with maybe, when we were a little bit more naive or less mature in our undergraduate studies. So I just want to put in some encouragement for folks in that category as well.
Yeah, thank you for doing that, Amber. Okay, moving on. There are quite a few questions, and we have such an international group today, about how we evaluate international transcripts. Maybe we can broaden it and everybody could talk a little bit about the international nature of your community. And I'm guessing that our teams have lots of expertise collectively in seeing transcripts from all around the world. But let me open that up to, some concerns about how prepared we are to really interpret transcripts from different regions of the world.
I'm happy to speak to this. A lot of us, I know it may not seem like we might be well versed in your country's kind of academic systems and transcripts. Many of us are. We have spent many years kind of looking at your transcripts, understanding the grading scale, understanding the strength of your institution in your home country and across the kind of world. So many of us will very much understand your grading system. You're always encouraged to, though, if you have a document you can provide that talks a little bit about your grading scale or how your academics are assessed, you can usually include that in your application. We are also usually, most of us are very happy to accept some sort of transcript evaluation service. I don't want to necessarily recommend any one in particular, but there are services like WES that do some evaluations. Most programs may not require that, but it's certainly something you can take advantage of if you're concerned about this. You can also reach out to the schools that you're interested in and just ensure that you're explaining your academic situation. I know there are countries where your overall grade might look a little bit different, or maybe you don't receive a GPA. Or maybe that kind of academic grading is coming much later after your degree is completed. So all of those kind of special situations, you can definitely connect with your program and discuss. But in general, we're super happy to receive any sort of evaluation and also familiar with your scales.
Thank you, Lisa. Okay, getting back to standardized tests. There's lots of questions about standardized tests, ranging from what are our average test scores to do we take the highest test if somebody takes it multiple times, and a question that, is it true that the quant is more important than the verbal? So let's go back and revisit standardized tests. I am going to assume, and panelists, tell me if I'm wrong, that all of us have class profiles on our websites, and that people can go to our individual school websites and see the class profile and the multiple dimensions of the class profile, including averages or ranges or means and of different test scores. And then if anybody doesn't, maybe those are questions for the individual school sources, but that's a good way to see what our school's averages are. But again, I'm going to go back to what Matt said earlier from Ross, that there is not one area of your application that is going to make or break. The word holistic has come up a lot because we're looking at things, different components of your application in totality. One of the questions I'll put out to the panelists, is it true that the quant is more important than the verbal? I can also chime in on this. We actually did a study at Darden before we went, offered a test waiver, and we looked a lot at different elements of the application process to see what correlated with academic success at Darden before we offered a test waiver, so that we were informed and using data to make decisions. And I would say they're both important, but one of the things that we learned in this study is that the verbal score actually correlated more with success than the quantitative score, and that there was a high correlation between the interview and academic success. So, I think that the assumption may be out there that the quant is more important, but my guess is that most schools are looking at both. It was just an interesting finding.
Yeah, I think it depends, and that'll be the answer that you offer up in MBA classes for 2 years as well. It depends. I think if let's say you come from a liberal arts background, majored in English, what have you, or majored in your native language, and that quant score could help, tell your story that, yeah, I might have a humanities background, I may not have worked in business before, but wow, I really am analytical, and that can help, shape your story that, yes, I am analytical, I am good with numbers, and I may not have been able to demonstrate that in my undergraduate career or my work, but that test score is able to explain, that you are a well-rounded individual. So everyone majors in different things. Once again, everyone has different work experiences. So those test scores can help, reaffirm, your abilities, but also can close some gaps. And that's good. That's for either the quant or the qualitative side of the exams.
And if I could add to that, a previous colleague from this group a couple years ago, I can't take credit for this, said we're looking for reasons to admit you, not reasons to deny you. So keep that in mind. If you're worried about your quantitative section, ensure that it's demonstrated somewhere else in your application. Many of us like to see, some sort of MBA prep program that focuses on the kind of math component of the MBA. So if you're someone who's a little bit worried about that, that would be something you could do now to prepare. And just keep in mind, like if we're seeing one of those areas a little bit lower or some sort of outlier, we're going to be searching for other areas of your application to kind of balance that out.
Really great point, Lisa, and one that I really hope the participants heard, that we're looking for reasons to admit, not deny. I've always disliked the term gatekeeper. I think if any of our applicants were in the halls of our offices, I think there's usually a lot of buzz. Somebody is running into somebody's office saying, oh my gosh, I just interviewed the most interesting person, or I read such an interesting, compelling application. And the conversations tend to be very positive and ones of, advocacy and admissions committee. And so I'm so glad you raised that point. Okay, I'm going to address one more question before I allow a few moments for you to transition into your breakout rooms. And that is a question that is coming up about the reapplication process. Should applicants apply and maybe be waitlisted or denied the first year? What are our reapplication processes like? How do we view reapplicants?
I'm happy to answer this one first. I would say at Fuqua, we love reapplicants. We have a good chunk of them every year. And you are able to clone your application from the previous years. So you're not having to re-enter that demographic information. But I think with any reapplicant process, making sure you understand that we all have a holistic review process. So going back through your application, combing through each section and thinking about ways you can improve. If you're going to go through the effort to reapply, we are looking for something to be a little bit different. So don't just resubmit the exact same application as you did before. Now, if you wrote excellent essays and you don't think they need to be touched, you absolutely can resubmit similar components or like some of the same components, but just make sure you are going through that self-reflection and finding ways that you can improve some things or some areas of your application.
Good point. I think most of us love our reapplicants, if the persistence and resilience. I know at our school, about 15% of our entering students each year are reapplicants. So love, very relevant. If at first you don't succeed, try again. I think having been on panels many times, I think most of us perceive our reapplicants so positively and appreciate their persistence and willingness to try again. Okay, well, go ahead.
I was just going to add to that too, is just to make sure that you emphasize what you've been doing in the meantime when you're reapplying. I think that really helps. It's a good way for us to get a little update on what you've been up to, what you've done to try to improve your application. And
great, thank you, Amber. Okay, and one of our goals for this session was to demystify the application process and make it feel less daunting. I hope this was really helpful to you. One final just piece of advice, because we do know that this can be a stressful process, but so many applicants tell us when they're on the other side that it's just such a great exercise in self-reflection, forces you to work on things like asking yourself important questions as you're answering essays and going on interviews and working on that resume. An important point to make it less daunting is that a lot of the hard work is already behind you. So by the time you apply to a business school, you have completed most likely your undergraduate degree. You've been involved, is already behind you. You've been working on creating a compelling application for years. And I'm mentioning that because I hope it takes a little edge off that, okay, I'm well into this process because I'm really proud of my career so far, for example. So please keep that in mind. At this time, I'd love to thank our panelists for sharing their insights with everyone. Would love to thank our attendees for taking an hour out of your day to listen to this panel. At this point, we would like to encourage you to visit the various schools in different breakout rooms. You should have received an email with links to various breakout rooms, and hope you enjoy meeting admissions reps from each of our